I'm Brian Freise alongside Laura Duncan, and you're listening to the Triggered and True podcast. This is a podcast that's all about you, discovering you, going back for you, being with you. You're more than the pain you've experienced, the behaviors you're expressing, and the thoughts that run through your head. Together, we will find your true self, which has always been with you. It's just been covered up. Tune in as we show you how to feel your pain, get comfort, and go play as you return to you. It's time to transform from triggered to true. Well, hello and welcome everyone to this episode of Triggered and True. And Laura, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Yeah. Are you enjoying summer so far?
Yes, 105 degrees is really enjoyable.
Well, I always remember you sharing how much you enjoyed summer
I
when you
do
had
love
when
summer.
your kids were younger, and now your kids aren't as, little
Yeah.
anymore. So
Yeah, it's still fun, but it definitely doesn't have the same. And also that whole you work hard during the school year and then you get summer and it feels like so exciting. But now my kids are graduating and everything, so there's not really any school break.
right. Right. Well, you'll just have to wait for the grandchildren to have their school breaks.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Yeah. Yes, very exciting. So we have some great revelation to share today. So I'm excited because it's new revelation. It's things that Laura has just kind of stumbled into and learned herself for the first time, and she's going to be sharing with us today. And it all centers around some new revelations around shame and blame. And so, Laura, why don't you just start off with talking a little bit about the origins of shame and blame, and just a little bit of the.
Yeah, we'll do a little refresher. I know we've
Yep.
done shame and blame before, but just kind of giving a refresher of it. Just the thing that makes shame so powerful in our lives is because it directly is connected to how we see ourselves and our identity. So when we feel guilty about something that we did, it's about our action. It's not about who we are. But one of the things that makes shame so debilitating is that shame's voice says, what you do is who you are, which creates such a helplessness and a hopelessness in all of us. Because if it's who I am, it can't be changed. But if it's my behavior, I can change my behavior. But if there's something wrong with me, it makes us feel like there's something always going to be wrong with us because it's saying what we've done is who we are. And the freedom comes from recognizing that what we do matters, but we matter more, and making that connection with ourselves in the midst of it. I was just actually this morning meeting with a client, and they were talking about being raised in more of a religious home where, they felt like, if they were good, then they were good. Like who they were was good. And if they were bad, then who they were was bad. And we kind of talked about how that impacts attachment, and how attachment, I always kind of like looking at it like a hose, like two hoses connect, a caregiver and a parent, they connect and we get a proper attachment. But what happens a lot of times when shame is very prevalent in our early childhood development, what ends up happening is instead of having that hose always connected to a caregiver, which builds trust and support and connection and stability, when we do something wrong, the caregiver disconnects the hose to show us that we're wrong, to intentionally, unintentionally punish us for our behavior so we stop doing what we're doing. But instead, as a child, it just says that there's something wrong with me, that my parents detached from me. And then what can even happen through that as well is that when we detach from a caregiver, if that hose detaches from a caregiver, now we're desperate for connection. So now we're going to attach to someone else or something else. And a lot of times that ends up being a behavior or something that causes us to stay in that perpetual cycle of shame. This client specifically was talking about being exposed to pornography at a very young age. When they were exposed to that pornography, because their parents would attach and detach, every time they felt the parents' disapproval, they would go to pornography to feel accepted, to feel connected. So you can see how that detachment started to create an instability in that child because they couldn't get the affection they needed from their parents, because their parents saw them, not just their action, but saw them as bad, So there was a disconnection. And that's why shame really is so difficult to understand, because it becomes so much part of who we are. And a lot of times you'll talk to an adult and they'll be like, yeah, I don't think I am my addiction. But if you
Mm.
catch them in their trigger and you catch them in that moment, we do feel like that's who we are. And so having that proper attachment is so important, and shame becomes a barrier to proper attachment.
So for more on that, episode 40, I went back and
Yes,
looked.
good.
So
Yep.
episode 40, we did a whole episode entitled "What You Do Is Not Who You Are."
Yes, exactly. So go back to that for more references. But as a summary, that's what we're talking about today, of shame, and just how, again, how much shame keeps us from being able to know who we are and to be who we were created to be.
Yeah. And then all the way back on episode 2, we did an episode on shame versus identity, and
Yep.
hitting on a lot of those same themes. So,
Yep,
so
exactly.
that's a little background on shame. So how does blame come into this then?
So shame and blame are best friends. So shame creates the pain, like I talked about, from detachment. So we all have this, what I call, I've said it before, like a pain ball, like we all have this pain in our hearts from, lack of connection, lack of proper attachment.
I always say
Um,
we're all carrying around a ball of pain. Every
Yep,
human
we are.
being on the
Every
planet.
single human. Some have bigger ones, some have smaller ones, but everyone is carrying it around. So what happens is it comes up inside of us, and it's so painful, and we don't know what to do with it, or we don't know, or we don't want to do anything with it because it's so uncomfortable, that we have to displace it somewhere. So blame is the displacement of pain and shame. And so when I displace my blame on you or myself or God or anything else, I'm trying to avoid my pain by blaming you for the wound that I'm actually experiencing.
I call it passing the baton.
Yep, it really is,
It's
because
like
we, yeah.
I got this baton or this ball of pain. I'm gonna hand it over to you. It's like hot potato. Like it's
Yep.
yours now
Yep, exactly. And it feels so relieving. It's definitely
for
a
a moment.
medication. Yes, for a moment. And then guess what? It's like you have to blame, the pain comes back up again. Then we have to get more creative in our blame, and we have to find new people and new situations and new circumstances to blame.
New villains.
Yes,
So
new
yeah,
villains in our story. And
yeah.
sometimes blame, if you feel like you're not supposed to blame people, you'll either blame yourself, which is usually what happens, or you blame circumstances, you blame the weather, you blame money, you blame all these other things, because we're not actually connecting it to our pain, whether it be circumstantial or a person.
Isn't blaming yourself really kind of just like shame? Like
It
self
is.
blame is
Yep,
shame. Yeah.
exactly. It's kind of like I already feel shame because I believe what I did is who I am, and I believe there's something wrong with me. So now I'm going to blame myself for everything I do wrong because of the shame that I experience.
So I've kind of found that some people have a natural tendency to either displace blame on others or direct it back on themselves
Yes.
in the form of shame. So what kind of leads people one direction or the other, you think, as far as how they handle their pain
Yeah.
here?
So a lot of it's going to obviously go back to early childhood development. And so many times it's kind of where we were allowed to blame, I would say, like if you felt like you couldn't blame your parents because
Like
they
what
were
was
all powerful.
acceptable or what was
Exactly. And or like it was wrong, like, treat other, like, like all those rules of like, treat others as you want to be treated, all those types of things. And so you're not supposed to blame other people. So then we don't know where we can't displace on other people because that's wrong. And that just increases our shame. So to try
right?
to be good, which is also
We're even
increasing
going to
shame.
blame less.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So we ended up not blaming other people because we weren't allowed to blame other people. So then we blame ourselves. But we have to blame someone or something to relieve ourselves of the pain. And it just gets creative where we felt that it was acceptable to blame when we were younger.
Yeah. Well, really, some of your new revelation that you've had is really about kind of like some secondary things
Yeah, exactly.
of where kind of blame kind of manifests in other areas that were like you just kind of connected the dot. Like, okay,
Yeah,
you've probably seen this in your practice where people
definitely.
have said, I feel certain way over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And you just connected like, oh, wow, that's connected to blame.
Yeah. Yep.
And the particular one you told me about the other day was in the area of misunderstood.
Yeah, that one is so prominent. Like, I'd say, I don't know exactly statistically what it is, but I'd say 8, maybe even 9 out of 10 people have some level of connection with misunderstood. And misunderstood is such an interesting one because it's like it's justifiable. Like if somebody comes to you and says, I just feel so misunderstood. You're like, oh, that's terrible. Like, no one likes to feel
We can all
not
relate to that.
understood. Yeah, we
Yeah.
all relate to it. And so what ends up happening is it feels so much more justifiable to feel misunderstood, which many times people say I feel misunderstood. And then I would still go through the same process of the compassion method to help them, but it was almost like it was like okay to be misunderstood because of the pain connected to feeling misunderstood. But what I realized recently is that misunderstood is still blame. And misunderstood is still blaming others or our circumstances for not being understood. We're still wanting an external person to help us internally to be understood. And that sounds good. Like, of course, yeah, everyone wants to be understood. But what I realize is it comes back to early childhood development that we actually were not taught, we did not learn how to be understood. So therefore, we perpetually feel misunderstood the rest of our lives. Whether a person is understanding us or not understanding us, we feel misunderstood because we don't know how to be understood. And I would take it even a step further and say, we don't know how to understand ourselves
Right.
because we didn't have caregivers hearing us, teaching us,
Seeing us. Yeah.
seeing us. And so we don't know how to understand ourselves. So we're constantly projecting it externally. Nobody understands me because I actually don't know how to understand myself first. And then, second, I don't know how to express or communicate myself to another person to be understood. So I don't know how to be understood versus I am misunderstood.
You kind of gave an example of this, of even you connected it to physical feelings. Like, so the other day I was trying to explain I have a hip issue and I was trying to explain that to someone. And I found myself trying to explain what my hip was doing and how I was feeling. And I just couldn't put any words to it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, how am I going to articulate to this medical professional how I feel when this happens? Like,
Yep.
I'm like, well, it's a catch, it's a this, it's a that. I'm like, I couldn't put words to it. So I really had to think a while and be like, okay,
Yep.
how do I explain this?
Yes.
And you said it's a little similar to that because it's kind of like with our
Very
feelings.
similar.
A lot of
Yep.
times these feelings come up and we don't understand
We
what's
don't
going on.
exactly. And we're desperately wanting to be understood because that's part of connection and relationship, but we
And
don't know how
we
to
think
be.
these other people should understand what's going on when we have no clue
Exactly.
ourselves.
Exactly. We
Yeah.
think to be understood means someone reads your mind,
Right.
that somebody knows you more than you know yourself.
Oh, that kind of hits home. I run into this in
You're
life
like,
a
wait a
lot.
second, this seems
I'm not going to
familiar.
use examples of where I run into this, but I'm like, oh yeah, right, right. Like I should
Yeah.
read minds. Yeah. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think I really probably should, I suppose, but
I wish we had that.
that
But the thing about it
superpower.
is, if the person doesn't understand themselves, even if you had the superpower of reading minds, it wouldn't make connection. Because if I don't know me, even if you could read my mind, I'm not going to be understood because I don't understand me.
So kind of what you're saying too is that when you have this big feeling of misunderstood, it's a trigger.
It's definitely a trigger, which usually leads to blame and justifiable blame because who's
Of
going to
course they should
argue that
understand me.
exactly?
Of
And
course.
pretty universally, if you talk to most people, they're like, yeah, misunderstood, and they should understand you. But the thing is, it comes back to us again, which again is always like a little frustrating because we're like, if they could just understand me, I wouldn't have to understand myself. But that's the
If they could just
beauty.
do it for me. Yes.
Exactly. But that's the beauty of the whole compassion method is that we are empowered to be able to learn by going back to early childhood development how to understand ourselves and then be able to be understood by others. If I understand me, I don't need capital N need anyone to understand me. I am understood. And then the second part is being able to help help our child self realize, how can we communicate through words, body language, expression? How can we communicate and help others understand me? Similar to what you're talking about with going to the doctor and being able to try to describe that to them. We have to sit with ourselves. We have to understand ourselves, and we have to recognize it's not just our adult self understanding ourselves. It's going back specifically when we're in a triggered state to our child brain and helping our child brain receive the 10 gifts, receive the comfort in order to be able to understand themselves there. And then I will understand myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And I kind of said this to a friend recently that was going through a difficult relational challenge, is that there's no easy way out of this.
Only
Like,
through. Yeah.
only through. And that's kind of the thing with blame, is you're kind of, your body like is trying to find an easier way out.
It is. It's trying to avoid it. It's saying, can
Yeah.
we do it a different way? But the only way through is to actually feel the pain, to receive comfort, to be able to go through.
Yeah. So in the remote control exercise, we would be pausing the blaming. Like,
Yep. Yeah.
there's no
Spend a
villain.
week
We're not
pausing
going to, yeah.
misunderstood. Every single time for a week that you feel misunderstood, pause it. Go back to being little. Find that memory of misunderstood. It feels the same as it does as an adult. Feel that memory of misunderstood. What do you need? Who do you need to be with you and misunderstood until you know that you're understood no matter what?
And what do you need would be one of the 10 gifts.
Yep, exactly. And
You need to
so,
be seen, heard,
yep,
protected, play,
yep,
provision, go through the list.
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
That lack brings the conclusion or interpretation of misunderstood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's very, very interesting learning. And I think I think our role as anybody that's helping anyone, because we've talked about how you really can't help anyone, like they
Yeah.
really have to help themselves.
It's true.
But I
And
guess
I don't like that for myself either. So I understand when you don't like that.
where I would maybe say that a little bit differently, Laura, is I would say, there is one thing we can help people do, is we can help bring them awareness
Yeah,
of their
that's
trigger.
true. Yeah, for
And
them to be able to take care of it themselves.
yeah,
But sometimes we're not aware, and we need outside influences to help us be aware of the trigger, in this case, of misunderstanding.
well, there's that adage, we can't see the forest through the trees. So here I
Yeah.
am, always feeling misunderstood. Now I have someone telling me that, hey, that's actually a trigger response. There's maybe a little more going on underneath the hood there.
Yeah.
There's great hope for you there, but it's going to
Mhm.
require you to kind of mine this out. Like,
Yeah. Especially if you think about how our historical evidence that we build with any pain or any wound, but specifically we're talking about misunderstanding right now. We've built historical evidence of all of our misunderstandings that we've had. And some people have huge misunderstandings,
yeah,
life-threatening misunderstandings. And so we have this historical evidence that proves and reinforces this constant feeling of misunderstood. So in order to humble ourselves and you walk through the remote control exercise, we have to get tender and vulnerable and misunderstood. And I think misunderstood is such a shield that protects us from being vulnerable with ourselves. If I can blame you for misunderstanding me, and I can blame the whole world for misunderstanding me, just like with any other wound, I don't have to face my pain.
right. Right. Yeah. And that's coming from a lonely place, I would think. The
Yeah.
misunderstood, like I'm all alone, nobody gets
Yep,
me.
exactly. I mean, obviously it could still be sad or scared, but I
Yeah.
think primarily it comes from a loneliness and it comes from a lack of attachment. That when we feel attached and unconditionally accepted, unconditionally loved, we feel unconditionally understood.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things you talked to me about, and I'm like, gosh, I wish I knew this, when my kids were little, but you talked to me about talking to your children, just giving them permission to talk about how they're feeling and just
Mm-hmm.
asking, how are you feeling? Like,
Yep.
what emotions are you feeling? Or what does that bring up in you? And that's like, when I was a kid, that'd have been like crazy talk. Like, what are you,
Oh
everyone would
yeah.
look at you like, what are you feeling? I don't know.
Yeah,
Hot, cold? What are you talking
exactly.
about?
Yeah, hungry.
Is it cold out? Is it warm out? What is it? So yeah. But that would be a great way as a caregiver
Hmm.
of young children to help
Yep.
them start to be able to communicate, and you're kind of giving them the gift to understood, because really what you're giving them is like you're allowing them, you're seeing them,
Yeah.
you're hearing them as they're
You're
sharing it.
with them. Yep.
You're giving them the 10 gifts. It's like
Yeah.
it's kind of like when that little homework you gave around that was just kind of like, a way to stealthily give the little children in your charge, those 10
Yeah.
gifts,
Yep.
so
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. But the beautiful thing is that even if that didn't happen for you in early childhood development, as for most of us, obviously all of those gifts weren't given, we can go back.
Yeah.
We can go back and give our little selves those gifts that we didn't get.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. And that includes being understood.
yeah. There's another one you talked about, or a couple other ones in the areas of trust. Trust was another one you brought up
Yeah.
as kind of
Yep.
being a secondary trigger. Like, I can't
Hmm.
trust anyone.
Yep, exactly. Which really comes back. If you have trust issues as an adult, it doesn't matter if you had an event happen as an adult, your ability to trust started in early childhood development, and most likely is connected to a lack of comfort or a lack of your needs being met. So here we are, you get married as adults and now you're trying to trust your spouse, where really this is a lack that you had in early childhood development, that even if that person never does anything wrong, you're still going to be on defense. You're still going to have that feeling of mistrust, whether the person does something or doesn't do something. And so being able to go back to early childhood development and say, that's where we build trust. We don't build trust with another individual, capital T trust. So if somebody lies to you, or if somebody does something to
Right.
you or hurts you in some way, sure, we can build lower T trust, that's just a mutual respect of two individuals, that you're going to try to
But
be honest with
it's
yourself.
not a life or death
It's
thing.
not life or death.
Yeah, it's
Exactly.
like,
Where
hey, I'm not going to do business with this person because they don't pay me.
exactly. No,
So
exactly. Like,
I'm
those
not going to
are
mow their lawn anymore because I haven't been paid for the last 2 summers, that type of
exactly,
thing.
but it's not personal. It doesn't feel, when you hear most couples that struggle with trust, it's that capital T trust that I've talked about, that started a long time ago, before you ever even met this person, before they ever did an untrustworthy behavior. We actually learn trust in early childhood development, and that means that we're able to trust in an internal way, no matter what. Even if somebody does admit, and it's just a behavior that someone does, but it's not personal. But if
Yeah.
you ever talk with somebody that has trust issues, or has a hard time feeling
Well,
like they
it's
can
life or
trust
death. Yeah.
anyone, it's life or death.
Yeah.
I don't feel safe. I feel like something bad's going to happen. I feel like I'm not going to be okay. Those are all signs
I
that
can't
we're actually
trust them to protect me, but you're an adult and
exactly,
you don't need someone to protect you in that way
exactly.
anymore. Yeah.
Yep. And
Yeah.
so now we're recognizing, oh, just like misunderstanding, mistrust didn't start as an adult with this behavior that I experienced as an adult. It started a long time ago. When I build trust with my child self, I build trust in my adult life.
Which one of the 10 gifts do you think could you possibly see like trust connecting with? A lack in this gift would,
I would say many
like,
times the lack of protection, because,
I was
if
thinking
we,
protection and provision.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I think often people associate safety with trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times I think it'd be protection, but also like acceptance, for example. It's like, if I feel like I'm never accepted, or wasn't accepted when I was a child, then it's going to be hard for me to trust people's intentions. Maybe not even necessarily their full behavior, but their intentions. There's different types of trust. There aren't just because of somebody else's behavior. It's also hard to trust if someone really means what they say. It's not even just that they'll do what they say, but do they mean what they say? And that could be a
Right.
lack of acceptance.
Yeah, I could really see that in the area of the one that resonated the most when you shared was definitely protection. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whether it's protecting from, physical harm or even just emotional harm, like,
Yeah, definitely.
someone
I'd say
that's
that would be more prominent.
not fun to be around. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think the key thing is, like you're talking about, it's about learning to really be okay, even when you're around. And we talk about okay as being clear-minded, tenderhearted, and at peace. Like
Yeah.
our inner world can be peaceful, even if we
Mm-hmm.
are forced to have some situations where we have to be around untrustworthy people or
Yep.
relatives
Yep. Exactly.
or family where sometimes if it's people you're like, hey, I'm just not going to hang around those people anymore. Sometimes with family, like,
Yeah.
hey,
Makes it a lot more difficult.
they're going to be at that wedding, they're going to be at that funeral, they're going to be around there.
Yep.
And
How can I be okay even if their behavior is not
right,
trustworthy? And also, when I have trust within me, I see people's untrustworthy behavior as behavior, not person.
right,
Because a
yeah,
person
you
can
start
still
to
be a
see.
trustworthy person even if they have untrustworthy behavior.
Yeah, like you'll start to see that, what, there's more to their story. That's not
Mm-hmm.
who they are. Just like you
Exactly.
have that same compassion you have for yourself when you do
Yeah.
something stupid,
Yep.
because we all do untrustworthy things. Like
Every
we've
single
all,
human. Exactly.
or we've all done things where we haven't, been there for other people in the way they needed us to be or
Yep.
whatever. So we definitely have done that, and we'll start to have that same compassion on other people.
Yep.
So the
Exactly.
beautiful thing about the process is it starts with you, and like other people just get to ride the wave. Like it
Yep.
just spills over on them. Like, you know what? I'm not going to blame that person. I'm not going to call them names. I recognize that they're hurting. They got issues too. And one of the things I've had a couple revelations myself in
Yeah.
this area
Yeah.
of shame and blame. And one of the big ones was about like my only so personal taking too much responsibility has been one of my protectors over
Yeah.
responsibility. So I've really come to terms with, like, as I can let go of that protector because I don't need it as much anymore. I say as much. It's a progression, right? I don't
Yeah.
need that
Just
protector
kind of
as
depends on how triggered we are, usually,
yeah,
is how much we need our protectors.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So I don't need it as much because my big ball of pain is shrinking.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people get frustrated, I think, with this process because they want the pain to go away
Just
immediately.
like
It's like,
instantly. Yeah.
well, just remember this big ball of pain had you at a 10. You go to the little
Yeah.
doctor and you got the little smiley faces.
Yeah.
Which one are you? Yours was 10. Like you got this big frown, and like you were
Yep.
green. You were green because you were so sick, you
Yep.
know, and yeah, and the thermometer hanging on your mouth, and you were like barely hanging on. You were at a 10, and we have shrunk that ball of pain to where now you're like a 5,
Yeah.
and we're gonna keep going after it until that ball of pain
Hmm.
is like a
We're going to keep bringing so much comfort and meeting
yeah,
the
so
needs
much comfort.
so strongly
Yeah.
that it shrinks and shrinks through love.
So as I'm learning to let go of over responsibility, I've really recognized, like, the only thing that I can do for other people is bring awareness. And as if they're triggered. So we talk a lot about, people aren't what they do, but what they do does matter.
Yep.
And like I'm an employer, I have
Yep.
employees. I've struggled with at times as I've learned this, and I can see that maybe a person struggling. I can see their pain. I might even see where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Like I had a scenario the other day where I had an interaction with someone, and like I physically felt like I was sitting next to someone that, this person's probably 30, but that was 5. Like I could
Mm.
feel like their pain was that
Yeah.
out there. And I was like, okay, I had to like shift. And I'm like, not going to have an adult, you got to
No.
do this conversation. I'm going
Yeah.
to try to have a conversation with someone that's obviously at a much earlier state of development.
Yeah.
But yet at the same time, like what they do matters because,
Yeah. You're an
it,
employer, they're your employee. It matters.
yeah, like how they are interacting with other clients and with their peers and all that other stuff. So it's like sometimes difficult to develop with it, but I recognize that there was a whole lot of me that one of the things preventing me from sometimes doing the hard things that needed to be done was
Yeah.
like my need to be liked, My
Yeah.
need to, which is all, obviously other triggered things that connect
Yeah.
back to like, if I don't feel valuable or enough, I'm going to have a really hard time because these people are not going to appreciate having this
No,
addressed.
no,
Right.
exactly. Yep. And if it's contingent on how you feel internally, then you're going to withhold or you're going to try to avoid it.
But hey, I'm not doing the world any favors by not helping bring their
No.
awareness. So I was reading it. There's a big revelation I had. So I was reading in 2 Samuel, and I was reading the story about when David was confronted by his sin of where he basically took another man's wife. She became pregnant, and then he essentially had her husband killed, and to try to cover up everything. And it was just bad. Okay. So he gets confronted by this man, comes to him and tells him basically a parable about a story of someone that did essentially the exact same thing, but he used livestock as an example. So he even used something a lot less severe than actually, human life. So he tells this story that's essentially the same thing, an allegory of what this guy just did, what David had just done. And David at the end of the story is like, oh, that man should be killed. And this guy, this prophet Nathan, points to him and he said, it's you. You did this. And like all my life, I just kind of, when I had read that story, I was just like, well, David got busted and he knew what he did. He knew how wrong it was. And he just kind of got caught. But when I read it this time, I was actually listening to the audio and reading at the same time. And like somehow there was like this connection, like, he just had an aha moment. He was, which sounds crazy, right? That you could do that diabolical of stuff and not be fully aware of how wrong it was.
Yeah.
But then I got to thinking, he was a king, and in his day, nobody questioned anything he said.
Yeah.
Anything went. You know, he could get away with murder, anything. And I'm like, when you give that level of power to someone on top of the fact that they're doing these shameful things that they're not going to want to own,
Yeah.
I guess it was possible. But the interesting thing is that when this guy brought the revelation, like the full aha moment hit David, and he was, he recognized how wrong of thing he had done, and he repented, and he went
Yeah.
through this whole process, and then he had to pay some horrible consequences for what he had done, and which was huge. And I kept thinking about like, okay, in life, how can we be like that prophet Nathan and help people with the awareness here?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah. Well, I
wow,
think the compassion
people
method
aren't going to
does bring
like
a
it.
lot of awareness with blame free, like
Totally.
it's very similar to that, not necessarily.
Well, to me, it's the first
Yeah.
step of the process. Like you have to be aware you're
Yeah,
triggered.
you do.
And a lot of times our trigger is sinful stuff.
Often.
David
Yeah.
in his trigger did all this other stuff and he just wasn't aware. So we bring awareness. And then I recognize that how oftentimes when you bring that awareness, people won't own it.
Yeah.
And
Shame keeps us from owning
shame,
it because
that was
we're
the other
so
part of
afraid of
that.
disconnection.
Yeah. Like
Sorry.
we're,
I'm all
you're,
getting excited.
that's totally my revelation of like
Yeah.
how shame won't let us take responsibility. So I would have a tendency to be judgmental. Like
Yeah.
for me, I'm not an external blamer. I'll always throw myself under the bus first
Yeah.
to a fault, because I'm the self blamer. I'm the
Hmm.
one that just absorbs the shame. I'm like, oh, you're right, I did something wrong. Even if I didn't do anything wrong, I will
Yep.
take responsibility and ownership for over
Over
responsibility kicking in again.
responsibility. Yeah.
So I would be very judgmental towards people that wouldn't own their crap.
Yeah.
I'm like, you
Because
won't
you're
own your
over
crap.
owning yours.
Yeah. So I'm like, exactly. I'm at this extreme over here. They're at this
Yep.
extreme over here. But guess what? We're both in the same spot,
Mhm.
really. Neither
Yeah.
one of us wants to go to that painful spot to actually comfort the pain that has us at
Yeah.
these two really big extremes.
Yep.
So my level of compassion for the people that won't own their crap has just gone up dramatically.
Hmm.
But also, my confidence in addressing it, which also mean like in the context of an employer, it might also mean like you no longer have a job here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't feel the, before whenever I would let someone go, I would feel like a failure. Like
Mm,
I should have been able to help them,
yeah.
or maybe what they did really wasn't so bad and I'm just
Mhm.
missing it, and I'll let it go on. I'll let something
Yeah.
very poor go on for too long
Yeah.
and not recognizing the ripple effect it creates throughout all the
Yeah.
other people that have to work with them and interact with them. And now I just have so much more freedom to be like, no,
Hmm.
I'm going to call it out for what it
Yep.
is. And I'm confident in that. So like I'm able to let go of some of those
Well, and I think, like you were saying,
protectors.
yep, exactly. When you can recognize that what a person does matters, but they matter more, you come from the place of you matter more, but your action has consequences.
Yes.
But when it's only about what a person does and we are shaming the person because we're saying it's who they are, then those consequences actually become personal, a
Right.
personal attack on the person, a personal judgment, a personal whatever it is, versus recognizing you matter and your behavior matters. But even though you matter more, your behavior still matters.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
that's the position. So it's like person first, behavior second creates the right balance for confronting people and being able to say what needs to be said. Because many times with the compassion method, people are like, oh, so then you just have compassion, you just let them walk all over you. And I'm like, no, actually, when you're okay within yourself, when
You
you're
won't
clear
let that
minded,
happen.
you're
You
tenderhearted, you're
won't
at
let that
peace,
happen.
you become your own boundary. You
Yeah.
won't let that happen. You will
Yep.
be firm, direct, still in love as you're doing that.
Fair. You'll be
Fair,
fair.
exactly. You'll be
Yeah.
all those things because that's who you are. It's actually when we try to be nice and do it in ways that we're avoiding being our true self in, avoiding being honest with ourselves and being honest with the person, that's actually more detrimental than what you matter.
Totally.
You still matter more, but your actions have consequences. Then we can address it appropriately because we're not attacking the person. We are bringing consequences to the action. And that would be the same for parenting. That would be the same for any relationship. And one thing I wanted to add too is judgment is blame.
Yeah.
And so when we're in judgment, it's either it's the how we judge ourselves that we judge others, or we're judging. Ultimately, that's where it stems from.
Yeah.
Is how we
Right.
judge ourselves is how we judge
Yeah.
others.
How we think about them, or, how we denigrate them in our brains. Yeah. That's really it's a mirror
And you
image.
can
It's how
have
we're speaking to our own heart.
exactly you can have judgment on a person's behavior. That's not shame, and that's not blame. But to have judgment on a person is always going to be connected to shame and blame.
Yeah. And that's where I think what really helped me was number one, obviously, as I've been able to connect more to my true self, I just naturally see other people's true self. So,
Mm-hmm.
like when I was able to address some of these tough situations in
Yeah.
this context, I was able to address them from here's how I see, here's who you are, here's how I
Yeah.
see how you are.
Yep.
Like you're this, and you're this, and you're this. Like I see your true self. Like I see
Yep.
that, but that's not what's showing up.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's a
This is
big
showing up.
difference.
And this is not who you are, but this is showing up. And I got to
Exactly.
address this over here.
Yes. And
Okay.
that's actually love. Same thing.
That's
Not that your kids, your
totally,
employees are your kids, but when you're able to love somebody enough to address their behaviors, that's love.
that is absolutely love. It is so selfish to not do that
Exactly.
because
That's our lack and that's our pain that we're withholding true confrontation because we're either doing it through shame and blame of the person or we're doing it towards ourselves.
we got to know the second we do it, especially if that person's a blamer, what's
Mhm.
going to happen.
Oh,
That
yeah.
thing's going to get spun around on you.
Yep. Knee
Oh,
jerk
that's
reaction,
you
whether
do.
they mean
Yeah.
to or not.
Yeah. That's going to get spun around on you. And you got to be prepared for that. And if you're someone that is like definitely the way I used to be, like I would just be like, oh, you're right. Because obviously they're going to bring up something. I'm
Of
sure that's
course.
true. That's right. It's
Yeah.
like, well, there is truth to that. I did screw that up. You know what I'm saying? So
Yep.
then I would just be like, well, I screwed up there. So I guess I'll just excuse all their actions. That's
Hmm.
kind of where I would land some other
Yeah.
times. But you got to know that's going to be coming back at you. But yeah, if you're full on the inside, you're like,
Yep. It doesn't
just
land the same
isn't going to
way,
land.
it still can, and we're not robots, like I've said multiple times. It still doesn't feel good. If I put myself in your shoes of having to let someone go, like it doesn't feel good. But it's definitely different when you took it personal
Well, if it
before.
feels good, you're probably triggered because
Yeah, probably.
you're trying to fix your trigger with doing something on the external. I'll
Yeah,
just
that's
get rid of
true.
that person and
Yeah,
then my life will be
totally.
better.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's definitely not the right
No,
energy. I always tell people it's like
exactly.
that's not the energy you want that to come from.
Exactly. You could be still saying the truth, but if the energy behind it is shame and blame, it's not going to have the same fruit.
Because a lot of what you say, even the stuff we were talking about around the feelings of being misunderstood, people are going to get mad. Like, no, 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 no. They just need to
Yep.
understand me.
Yep.
Like, they just need to get me. My
Yep.
spouse sucks. They just need to get me. And that's what I want you to help them do. I want you to help my
Yeah.
spouse
Yeah.
understand me, and then
Yeah.
everything will be okay. And but you're
Hmm.
saying, oh, it ain't about your spouse. That's what you're saying right
Mm-mm.
now.
It's
And
not.
that person's going to be mad.
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
definitely. It definitely triggers it, especially if we've had a habit our whole entire life and our programming is to blame. It's very, very difficult to have awareness for ourselves in those moments.
Well, and I firmly believe that's why this podcast has some 1-star ratings.
Probably. That's
So
true. It does trigger.
yeah, we have some 1-star ratings, and I'm like, golly, But I'm like, oh yeah, I'm sure we trigger some people with what we say. So
It definitely does. But at the end of the day, when people have asked me for like, I definitely don't take happiness or anything and triggering people by any means. But I care enough about people to be able to help people recognize it is within themselves, it is within
absolutely.
us,
Yeah.
because that's the only way out. If I keep reinforcing blame to not trigger people, I'm actually doing such a disservice. And that's what I had to decide, because I was a fawner most of my life. I was a people
Yep.
pleaser. I was all those things. And I remember in the very beginning when I started this process and people would have really big feelings when I would talk about being blame free, I'd have this little bit of a feeling of like, oh, maybe I should stop. And then I'd be like, no, if I actually care about this person, I'm not going to excuse blame. I'm not going to reinforce blame. I'm not going to justify blame. I'm going to say, you could be 100% right about everything that person's doing. What about you? And that's what triggers us so much, because we don't want to face that pain. The
Right.
triggers that people have when we bring up blame free living is because we're avoiding pain. And once I recognized that, I knew it wasn't me. They're not mad at me. They're avoiding their
Well,
own pain.
they're mad. They think that you're not validating. That's the whole big thing. Like
Exactly.
we need to
Yep.
validate their pain, which a lot of
Yeah.
times is just agreeing with their blame.
Exactly. And validating pain is not as important as validating the person. But we think if we validate pain, we're validating the person. But validating pain actually many times takes away from connection to true self and says that our pain is who we are because of what's happened to us or what we've experienced.
Well, the part that I think we can validate is I know you're hurting.
Of course,
We're not
100%.
going to deny your pain. Like,
No.
no, we know you're
Oh, it
hurting.
hurts.
We want to help you look at you and not this other person. But
Yeah.
yeah, so when they think that you say it's not about that other person or whatever, that they take that as, well,
Invalidation.
then I
Yeah.
shouldn't be hurting.
Hmm.
No, no, you're obviously hurting. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we can validate pain as what we're experiencing, what we're feeling
It's very
all day
real.
long. It's very real and very painful, but it's still not who the person is. When I go back and help people with traumas they experience in early childhood development, their pain matters. They matter more. And it's
Absolutely.
so important that that's not our identity. And in our validation, we want to be careful that we're validating that it's painful, but we're not validating that their pain is more important than who they are.
Yeah. Well, I think a charge I'd like to give everyone from this episode is, the bravest, most courageous thing that anyone listening that any of us will ever do is to face our own pain.
Yeah.
Head
Yeah, that's
on,
where the shame
square
stops.
on.
That's where the blame stops. That's where we're able to actually be aware and see ourselves.
Yep. And it is, yeah, a lot of times you feel like you're stepping, you're trying to like walk down a staircase blindfolded, or
Hmm.
you're
Oh,
walking out
yeah.
in the woods and you don't know what the next step's going to be because it's so dark, because it is a very new thing.
Yeah.
Like you don't know what to do with it, but we're teaching, and what you're teaching, the
Hmm.
compassion method process brings a lot of understanding, which will give people
Yeah.
the confidence to like, hey, okay, there's a system here. There's a
Yeah.
process I can engage called the compassion method that helps me
Yeah.
do this.
Yep.
And if you like it, the second part of this charge, we can get some 5-star reviews on the podcast because we have a lot of those too, but you know
Yeah.
me, I'm kind of competitive. I don't like them 1-star reviews, but
I didn't even know we had 1-star reviews.
you wouldn't, Laura, like you would, yeah,
And like
you're
my
so
true
blissful in
feeling
those
was
areas.
like, my true feeling was like, oh, we had a big feeling right there. Right or wrong.
Well,
That's a
well,
big
but
feeling.
here's what you know about the 1-star reviews, and here's what I know about them too, is that they're really hurting.
Yeah.
They came here and they thought they could get maybe a quick fix, or that we'd say the thing that validated their blame or
Yeah.
did something. And we're kind of like, no, that thing that you want to go to, we're like, it ain't going to work.
Yeah.
There's
It's
no
still
way,
within
there's no
us.
way
Even
around it.
even
It's
if
in
this is the
you.
worst podcast in the whole world, it's still within each person and how they interpret it and how their pain is. And that's what's most important. Even if people leave a 1-star review, what I'd want for every person that they be able to actually face their pain and get the comfort that
Absolutely.
they need.
Yeah. And all we can do is help bring awareness. And that's what we're doing today. And
That's
that's
what
a
we're
lot.
doing. It
That's a
is. It
lot.
is a lot. I know. It's really a privilege to bring awareness to such tender, vulnerable places in all of your hearts, all of our hearts.
Yeah. But when it comes from you, Laura, it comes so gentle that, and so thoughtful that even though it's hard to hear, it just lands so well. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a lot of compassion for people's pain, even though I hold the line to help people face their pain. I still have a lot of compassion for the process.
Absolutely. And you've helped me just, a little bit. I've
Just a
received
little bit.
a little bit of benefit, I mean, I'm mildly thankful that I met you, 48 podcasts later. This is podcast 48. So,
Wow.
yep. We'll have to think about something fun for number 50, right?
I know that would be
Yeah.
fun.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this episode, and be brave, be courageous, increase your own awareness. And as a byproduct, you're going to help other people be aware. And
Yeah.
you're going to be ready when that blame torch, the blame thrower, gets sent your direction by trying to help them. Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining us. Until next time. Goodbye.